Okay, we are looking again at the Compaq Presario 4112. This machine appeared to be fully working minus the CMOS battery here. So what we're going to try and do is we've got the negative side is soldered on here, and there's two solder points back here for the positive side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and take my soldering iron and just heat up the solder contacts. And it looks like they're on top of the board. So hopefully if I heat up the solder contacts and just give it a gentle lift here with the screwdriver, I'm hoping I can get the whole kit and caboodle off here without having to pull this whole board. Now the board's dusty, it needs to be cleaned anyway, but ideally I don't want to have to dismantle and take apart this board just to change a battery. So we're going to try that. Just waiting for the soldering iron to heat up here, and once we have that in place, we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so our soldering iron is good and hot, about 425 degrees. So I'm working around the camera here, so I'm hoping that I'll have just enough heat to not damage the board and to just lift these contacts up off the solder point. All right, it's looking promising there. Now, why Compaq decided to use this kind of setup with a soldered on battery eludes me. I don't see the value in that, but regardless, this is what we have to work with. So again, we're looking at the top of the board, so I'm hoping that by releasing the solder on top, we'll be able to release this whole battery unit off. And I'm also hoping I'm not accidentally making these solder joints better, but as you can see, we popped one part off there. And to get to the other side, here's going to be a little doing. And hopefully, by heating up the contact on the battery, we can get this off. Now this, of course, is all unplugged and safe. There we go. So obviously you wouldn't want to leave the computer powered on or anything while you're trying to play around with the board. But I'm hoping that with this thing good and hot, it'll let me just swap this battery out. Again, I'm trying not to damage anything in the process, but hey, got the battery off. Now let's give it a quick second just to cool. And as you can see, it's just a standard CMOS battery, and then it's got the little grippy on it here that's apparently soldered right to the battery. Now, just for ease of use in the future, what we are going to do is take a standard CMOS battery receptacle and solder that on to the board. Now, unfortunately, I don't have one at the ready, but what I do have is a dead motherboard that doesn't need one anymore. So while we're getting that arranged, we'll just jump cut it over there, and we'll get that old motherboard out, and we'll use that as a donor. Okay, so here's our donor board. It had a battery in it. I have not taken the chance on checking this at this point. I'm going to guess it's probably no good, but we'll take a multimeter to it just to see. So, excuse me, on this particular board, the positive solder point is on the left side. The negative solder point is on the right. So when we flip this over, the positive is going to be closer to the camera, and the negative will be further away. But as I flip it over here, I'm noticing these are our 2 solder points. So interesting. So we'll have to probably figure that out once we have it off. But we've got a nice hot soldering iron. We're going to go ahead and just let that get loose. Again, it was kind of a shame with this board. It has a socket AM2, but unfortunately it's got a dead display chip, and I just don't have access to those components to get that. I see this soldering iron's a little dirty. I'm not going to make a huge difference because we're going to be redoing all the solder. Alright, we're going to try and just push these through while they're nice and hot. Keep them nice and loose. One nice thing about working with salvage components is it really doesn't matter to me, especially on these dead boards. You know, if something doesn't work or if I don't get it working, it's not really any skin off my nose. So I would not necessarily recommend this. If you're really trying to save a PC, you know, be a little more cautious than I am. I'm sure plenty of you will want to hit me up in the comments and say, hey man, you know, you shouldn't do it that way, or you shouldn't do this, or shouldn't do that. You're probably right. I'm not gonna argue those points. But what I would say is, like, you got to remember, this was literally thrown away in a salvage yard before it came to me. So I'm really just giving it second life at this point, you know. So if it gets any kind of use, you know, it's by the grace of the fact that I dug this out of a pile. So hoping to get this loosened up a little bit more, but this one's being stubborn for whatever reason. All right. Let's see. And she's still stuck on there pretty good on that side. And it looks like the other side actually might be still in that solder joint too. The reason for that, or the reason they're made these ways, probably because they don't want people doing this. You know, harvesting components posthumously, which I get. It's also very possible that the way I'm taking this out is just the most inefficient way possible. Bear in mind, I'm a hobbyist. I'm not trained to repair electronics. This is just something I do in my free time. So I am not the best with the soldering iron, nor am I the best with, you know, circuit boards in general. But I know enough to make these videos and to study up and know what people are talking about in their videos. So if you have someone that you watch that you'd like to recommend, hit me up in the comments. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. It helps me to know more about what I like to do in my free time for my hobby, if I can see other people doing it maybe better, or perhaps you might say the right way. So I think at this point we may have just burned all the existing solder away, and there might not really be anything else left on here. I think I've finally got the one side free, and at this point we're just gonna keep at it until it loosens up enough for me to tap it on out of there. The nice part is I don't have to worry about like damaging any of these traces, because again, the board's dead. There's no saving this board in my estimation at this point. Now, could I get one of those display chips that it needs and troubleshoot and figure out, okay, which one of these is the bad one? Sure, I probably could. Am I going to do that? No, I'm not going to do that. Nothing against this board, but it's just a junkyard board. So let's see if we can get this free. All right, so in working this thing out, I saved one side, but as you can plainly see, I sheared off the other for the negative contact. So I think what we're going to try and do is save the negative contact from the old battery and see if we can just free that up enough and solder it to the negative contact on this little thing. Now again, the interesting thing about this Compaq board is it's got 2 contacts. So what I'm thinking is, since I'm trying to solder off this old stuff anyway, so I might try and just get these 2 contacts onto the bottom of this. Now, is that going to work? Who knows? Your guess is as good as mine. And since we've got this dead board here, we're going to use this as just a safety backing. And I'm going to grab a little needle nose to try and help work this off gently, and hopefully we don't ruin a second one. Okay, so I want to be kind of delicate about this because I don't want to rupture this battery. That is not really something I want to have to deal with. So I'm hoping I just heat it up just enough. This little piece will just sort of flop right off. Now, it's possible this actually isn't soldered and it's stamped on. If that's the case, we might be in for a bummer of a time. Let's see here. Looks like we might be making a little progress. Little by little, just to avoid heating this battery up too much, I'm going to try and free the other side a little bit here too at the same time. Now the other option I have, of course, is to just clip off the amount of material I need, or directly solder in some wires to the board and use something completely different, or I could actually just order the proper part. But seeing as I have these salvage materials here, why not use what I've got? Reduce, reuse, recycle, repurpose, all that good stuff. But I also don't want a little lithium battery to explode. Now I'm assuming back in the day, Compaq probably just had like a replacement part you could order that you just drop in place, pop the solder, and easy peasy. But unfortunately, don't really have that option to go with their OEM part. So we're just gonna try and kind of jimmy the old part off. All right, well, I might just be getting impatient at this point. I think we're just going to clip it and go from there. Also because the soldering iron's getting a little hot, and to be honest with you, I don't know that I'm making a whole lot of progress, and I don't want to risk rupturing this battery and setting it on fire. Fumes probably wouldn't be great to breathe in, so let's clip what we need and do a little surgery on the other battery base. Okay, so first things first, we're going to prep our little joint here with some solder. And then we're going to go ahead and add our new little plate. And hopefully this sticks the way I want it to. Oops. See, this is where having one of those nice little soldering stands would be great. Unfortunately, Santa did not bring me one. Very Merry Christmas to all of you who may celebrate, who are my subscribers. I appreciate you. Certainly hope you had a good holiday. Alright, so it's not perfect, but it at least has given me a bit of a start. We're just gonna, I know this is gonna get hot in a hurry, so alright, now just to add a little more solder to it. We can always bend it back into position. Just want to make sure we've got a nice solid joint so that it's making good contact. Now, of course, I went to articulate it, and the whole thing snapped off. So I think a soldering stand might behoove me in the future if I'm going to do more of this Frankenstein work, but that's all right. No big deal. I'll just loosen up the solder and plop that right in there. All right. Perfect. Now we just got to take the other part of the battery and do essentially the same thing to this side and just connect it to the other peg. And luckily the material that they used is pretty thin aluminum, so the stuff bends real easy, and it comes off kind of like twisting open a pop can. So I mean, I guess if there's one silver lining is, you know, reusing this has not been the most difficult thing in the world to achieve. I'm sure nobody ever intended on having somebody reuse this component of a battery, but hopefully it makes at least some, you know, entertainment for you guys who are, you know, nice enough to stick along with me on this ride this long. Now we got a nice healthy piece. We actually got the whole thing off there, so I'm hoping I can maybe take the existing pilot hole and just slip it on here onto this peg so we're not having to force anything too much. The peg itself is pretty flimsy. Let's see if I can take off a little bit of this extra solder and just make it a little smaller. There we go. Get some of the gunk off of there. And then hopefully, I mean, who knew we'd be going to these kind of lengths to try and revive this old Compaq machine? I mean, I don't think even Compaq would be like, just buy another one. Or just, just forget about this one, lost cause kind of thing. But we're not giving up. I don't like giving up on it. I'll just use a little screwdriver end to hold this in place. I don't like giving up on a machine that has some life left in it. And again, all this needed was a battery. Everything else on it seemed like it was in good working order. So, and who doesn't need an extra Windows 95 or Windows 98 machine laying around? You never know when you'll have some bored 30 and 40 something year old friends who are like, you know what, let's play a bunch of Warcraft 2. Why not? Or StarCraft or Doom or Quake, Counter-Strike, who knows? But that was a much easier solder job, I gotta say. So let's let that cool a little bit there. Take a look at the contacts here. Sturdy enough. And we've got our negative and our positive. And if we look at the old battery, you can see positive was mounted on top, negative was on the bottom. So we know we've got the correct contacts. We'll get our donor board out of here and make a little space, and let's get it to the board and see if we can get this thing working. Alright, so here's our contacts that we're going to be throwing this battery that we've cobbled back together into. Let's see if we can squeeze them back into place. Looks like it'll just fit. It's going to be a bit on the tenuous side, and I've just noticed that my great little solder job just broke on the one side, so we're going to have to fix that, and I think we'll get everything in place before we finish this off. Alright, so after all that, we ended up with some melted plastic, and we've got a very tenuously mounted 2032 battery in there. I'm really hoping that it's making like enough contact to get us a little juice to the CMOS, but it's, again, super tenuous. But in the name of science, we press on. Let's see what we can do here. We're going to go ahead and plug everything in, see if it works. All right, so everything's plugged in, and we've got still boots, so I didn't screw anything up too bad, apparently. Got some initializations going on. No beep codes so far. No error codes so far. Options not set. Time and date not set. Same errors we were getting before on this machine. All right. I mean, the good news is we didn't screw up this cobble job bad enough to where it fried the system, so that's a plus. Because I can always desolder that stuff and order a proper battery base. And we are stuck at this boot screen here. Disk controller failure. Time and date not set. Disk controller failure. Makes me wonder if our disk controllers are over here. I don't think so, but we'll see. Alright, well, let's do some troubleshooting and see what we can figure out. Alright, before I could do anything, it kicked over to a non-system disk or disk error, replace and strike when ready. And I've hit a button, however, I don't know that it's made any difference here. Let's grab a Windows 95 floppy and see if we can put a disk in and get something moving. Alright, I threw a Windows 95 floppy in there. I hit any key. And I guess we'll just see what happens next. Starting Windows 95 from the floppy. Got a prompt. Let's see if we can change direction. Alright, so we've got some files on this hard drive in here, so we know that the hard drive is working and we're accessible. Let's fiddle around and see if we can get it to boot. Well, after all that meddling around, found out a couple of things. So, yeah, this little cobble job, not doing the trick, so we're going to have to fix that at some point. I tried another hard drive here because we're getting a 1791 error on the hard drive. Actually, it's screwed in place, which tells me that that's likely a dead hard drive, although I was able to get it to boot to the floppy, and I was able to list the directories on that hard drive. So I'm thinking that it's possible that hard drive was just a storage drive and there's just not an operating system on it. I have one more drive I'm going to try, an old Fireball. I think it's a Fireball. And we'll see if we can get anything to go on there. But bottom line is we have the same issue with the CMOS battery. Not make or break. We'll just have to probably order the part to get a battery base for it. And then hopefully we can get this thing to boot. Let's try that last hard drive I have sitting around and see if we can get this to run. So, good news. Our Fireball here has Windows 98 and kicked right over into ScanDisk. So, we know that so far it looks like this machine will boot, which is great. I'm very happy to say. We still have the CMOS battery issue, but we know that the drive appears to be good. So, let's just see what we find out in terms of functionality here. Worst case scenario, we just don't have a CMOS battery until we can get a battery base, and that's not a critical issue. All right, well, great news. The hard drive works and it boots all the way to Windows. So we'll throw a mouse on this thing and see what we can find out about it. All right, so the final word on this is everything's working. It's just installing the whole chipset to Windows 98. Again, the CMOS battery obviously did not work out the way I planned. However, I had a couple of wires here, and I've taped them to another CMOS battery. So I'm going to try and solder these in once everything's done setting up, just to see if that works. I did order a proper base and some jumpers so I could get it wired in reasonably well so it doesn't look this horrible. But the good news is I think there's hope for this machine yet to have that CMOS battery restored. So aside from that, that's all I've got on this one. Thanks again for bearing with me on this odd repair project that kind of went sideways. But if you enjoyed what you saw, hit that subscribe button, hit that like button, drop me a comment, and I'd be happy to respond to anything you've got to say or any tips or tricks you might have. In the meantime, I've got more fun content coming up, hoping to share with you very soon. And have a great rest of your day.